I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Review, where we use our AI, Design Eye, to analyse a competition piece of mine from many years ago, mostly, and tell us how it meets the principles and elements of design and what I could do to improve the design given the name of the class title of the design. So this one is a still life design. Still life is a defined design criteria, and it is one of only two defined design styles where the plant material doesn't have to tell the story. In fact, the embellishments, the non-plant material is what is supposed to tell the story in these designs. I find the still life category quite a challenge because I always feel like there's not enough plant material in it. I guess we're conditioned always to make sure that the plant material predominates in our designs, and so when we have to do one where it doesn't, it really changes your thinking and changes the way you look at a design. Even now when I look at the design, I think, oh, it needs something more somewhere. But in fact, let's see what Design Eye has got to say about this design. First of all, let me give you the outline that the title for the still life was Memories, and we had 70 centimetres width. It was judged from the front, so as the photo has been taken is how it was judged. So what I've got there is a couple of books about Australian wildflowers, a turned timber vase with some wildflowers, so the kangaroo paw and the cresspedia in it, the bottle of champagne for celebration, and the glass for pouring the champagne into if I dared to open it, and some cresspedia and gum nuts sitting on a timber slice of Banksia tree, and a ribbon that I won in 2010, as you can see, for the Champion Australian Native Flora display. And that was a very auspicious moment. It was the second time that I had actually won a championship ribbon at this particular competition. And so for me, that is a memory that I will always cherish because it was about the plant material that we had grown on the farm, as well as the display that I had put together using that plant material. So that was my memory, and that was what I was depicting, was that it was a great celebration because I'd won the championship and it was about the wildflowers. And I thought that that told the story reasonably well in my thinking. The design in the competition that it was in, the design placed third, and the only feedback I got was that it needed a baseboard, and I agree with that. But I would have to think quite carefully about how I would make the baseboard, and perhaps in terms of a baseboard it would be mounting the certificate or the collection of certificates that I got that year onto something that was a circular framework underneath it, so that it was just a reflection of the memories that were associated with that particular competition. So let's now see what our AI Design Eye has got to say in terms of the principles and elements of design for this particular interpretation. Looking at line, first of all, the vertical lines of the kangaroo paw stems create height and echo the upright form of the wrapped wine bottle. The curved lines of the tessellated ribbons soften the composition and introduce movement. So I think that's a very good point to look at, is that if the ribbon wasn't there, it's a very static design. There's really no, so it's very still, I guess. There's no movement within the design itself. So even though the criteria is slightly different in the definition of this design style, you still got to follow the principles and elements of design. Let's see what else we've got in terms of our interpretation. Form. Strong recognisable forms are evident. The wine bottle, glass, books and vase each contribute to a traditional still life composition. So it's looking at it and understands what the definition is. It's been out onto the internet and looked at all of the definitions around the world and distilled those into what are the common, the similarities between the definitions. So it's all of those elements that are not necessarily the plant material that are contributing to it being a still life interpretation. Colour. A triadic scheme is established with warm pinks and yellows, cool greens in the foliage, and the bold red, blue, yellow of the ribbon. The backdrop of neutral corrugated wall allows the colours to remain the focus. Now, I know that in most competitions we don't get the opportunity to choose what the backdrop is for designs, and you will have seen some of the other designs I've done where there's been no backdrop at all, and you can actually see through to all the other designs that are behind it on the benches. But what I wanted to point out at this point is that if you are competing in online competitions, you do have the opportunity to control the backdrop to your design. And so always think about whether it's black or it's white or it's beige, that how is that backdrop going to allow the design to be the hero of the photo, because well, you're judged on the photo, not judged on how you look at it in real life when it's an online competition. So make sure always that you think about that background. Don't have too busy, don't have mirrors, don't have all sorts of things that don't enhance the design simply because you like the look of it when you can see it in a much broader context. The judge is going to look at it in terms of the image that is presented to them. So make sure you look at those images without being blinded by the things that you know you can see around the design when you're taking the photo. The colour scheme, we go back to the colour scheme in this design. The colour scheme, what I tried to do was keep it, use the ribbon. I knew the ribbon would be the standout colours, so try and keep it within the framework of those colours. So I've got the red in the kangaroo paw, I've got the yellow that matches the fringes on the printing on the ribbon in the craspedia. And the rest of it just is to sort of blend in with those, but I wanted that repetition of the colour on the ribbon because I knew it would be the standout colour and would be a dominant part of the design. Texture. The arrangement displays a pleasing mix of textures: smooth glass, rough bark, soft velvet flowers and woven fabric, all enhancing visual interest. And I think that perhaps this is where, for me, I struggled because, as you would know from all of the other videos I've done, texture is the thing that I like to focus on. And I think that there's a lack of textural contrast in this design. There's, as it says, a pleasing mix of textures, but there's no real contrast. There's a couple of little rough areas on the edges of the bar, both the bars and the timber slice, but the rest of it is smooth in terms of its visual appeal. And so I would like to see a little bit more contrast, a little bit more roughness, a little bit more, perhaps something that's a little bit more shiny in it, because they're smooth, but there's nothing that's really shiny in it. Space. Positive and negative space is managed thoughtfully, particularly between the main objects. However, the area between the bars and the bottle could benefit from a slightly clearer relationship. And I think that's true, and I think that what I needed to do was push the bottle back and bring the bars forward and bring them closer together, or have the ribbon coming down from the top of the bottle or the top of the bars so that it filled that space a little bit more. There will still be space above the ribbon if I did it that way, but there's a big gap, and they're not really connected in any way, so it almost splits the design in half, the bottle on one side, the bars on the other, and the only joining part is at the base. Size. Good size variation between the floral materials and the still life elements, providing contrast and avoiding monotony. So that's another interesting point that we don't often look at. We'll look at scale and proportion, but in terms of a still life, we want because it is this snapshot in time, we want a variation in size to be immediately obvious. So where in a normal design we would look at scale and proportion being in harmony, in a still life we want there to be variation so that that's where the interest is. Not so much in the variety of the plant materials, but in the sizes of what you've used, whether it's plant material or the still life elements. Balance is achieved through asymmetrical positioning. The heavier book and vase cluster on the left is balanced by the visual weight of the bottle, ribbon and wood slice on the right. So yes, the balance is there. You know, it doesn't look out of balance, but there is still that gap down the middle. And I think as you more you look at the image, the more you'll see that that is not helping the design to be cohesive in any way. Rhythm. Repetition of the yellow craspedia and woody textures across the composition encourages eye movement through the scene. Now you can't quite see in this image the craspedia that is on the wood slice. I do have it in, obviously, with the kangaroo paw, and then there's a couple on the wood slice, and because the yellow of the ribbon is much the same colour, so that helps it. But what I'm thinking when I look at it now is that I need some craspedia lower down in the vase so that your eye travels down through that line of from the top of the vase, I'm pointing at the image, from the top of the vase down through and almost a spiral, so across the ribbon and down to the craspedia on the bottom, and to bring some of the craspedia closer to the front as well, so that there was not only rhythm but repetition of that particular element within the design. Harmony and unity. A sense of unity is created by the consistent natural materials and Australian flora. The theme is well communicated. So I obviously felt that there was memory in what I was depicting there, and that it is a unified design in terms of the materials that have been used, not in terms of the use of the space, which we've looked at previously, and that I haven't introduced anything other than Australian native flora. So if I had other types of flora there, perhaps it wouldn't look as unified, because it would be that variety of plant material, but this way, keeping it all within the framework of where the plant material comes from, has helped to create some unity and harmony. Contrast. The hard edges of the books contrast with the organic shapes of the flowers and bark, offering tactile diversity. That's true, there isn't enough contrast, and I think this comes back to the texture, because I always like to have the texture be the thing that provides the contrast more so than colour or any of the other parts of the elements and principles of design. I don't think there's enough contrast in this design. The white wrapping on the bottle is jarring me a little bit. I know there's white in the ribbon, but it just seems like it's a big statement, a big focal area on that one side of the design. And had it been, you know, if the wrapping on that paper had been more in line with the colour of the top book, I think it would have blended in better and not been quite so jarring in terms of looking at it, and would have helped to be able to see the gum nuts and the craspedia that are on the base, around the base of that bottle. You would have heard the phone rang in the middle of while I was recording, and it was a call that I had to take, so I restarted the recording again, and we were talking about contrast and how I wasn't happy with the contrast in this design. And in looking at it, I'm trying to think of how I could have introduced other contrast in the design, and really it is all about, for me, the plant material. And the only other thing I can think of is perhaps if I had once again wrapped the bottle in something that was a little bit rougher or a little bit shinier, so maybe had some cellophane around it rather than the tissue paper, that might have added to the contrast within the design. So dominance now. The eye is drawn to the vibrant kangaroo paw stems, supported by the trophy ribbon and central placement of the bottle. So, to me, the dominant part of this design is the ribbon, and I think that's because the colour of it, and maybe it's because my memory of it was just so special in actually winning it. But I do think, you know, if you close your eyes, open your eyes again, the first thing you're drawn to is that ribbon, and that is the dominant part. It's interesting that an independent analysis in looking at this image is saying that the kangaroo paw, maybe because it's the colour and the height of them and the fact that they're so well set off from that background, that's a dominant part of it. But there's no one area that's dominant, which is interesting in terms of a still life design as well. That is one of the considerations, is that you don't have to have a single focal point. It can be interest equated. Depending on the judge, they might or might not feel one way or the other. Proportion. Most elements feel well proportioned in relation to each other. The tall kangaroo paw adds vertical interest without overwhelming the design. That's true, and I think I needed that height in terms of the design. I needed something that was taller than the bottle so that you're drawn up and away from the bottle itself. There are some things that I think are probably out of proportion. I think the placement of the gum nuts and the craspedia on the wood slice, that's out of proportion. In everything else, it has a definite size to it, and that particular placement is too small for the rest of the design. So let's have a look now at some of the suggestions of what I could do to improve this design. Number one, introduce a slight overlap or layering between the left and right groups to strengthen unity across the entire design. And we talked about this, I talked about this as we went through, that if I had lifted the ribbon up a little higher, perhaps if I'd had a stand and the ribbon was at the back of the design, hanging down the way they do when it's at a competition, it might have helped with the bringing those two sides of the design together. But it does need something to close up that gap a little bit, not fill the gap and not make it obvious that it's and not necessarily bring them closer together, but just to make them part of the one design, because really at the moment it does look like it's split down the middle between one half of the design and the other half. Consider refining the positioning of the book stack and vase to make the narrative of memories more emotionally evocative. For example, angled or open book, suggesting an active memory. And I think that's a really good suggestion, and that might be the thing that we could do to bring those two parts of the design together. If I had an open book standing on its spine, which is a bad thing to do in terms of books, but if I had an open book behind that, it would encompass those two sides, bring them together, still give me some negative space above the top of the book, and it would enhance the design. It would bring it all together, because the book would the edges of the book would make you look around and through the design. So that might be something that I would try and see how it looked, and see if that really made my eye feel more comfortable with the design. So a good suggestion. A soft underlay or fabric under the design could enhance cohesiveness and integrate the separate elements visually while softening the hard black base. So the black base is obviously the top of the show bench, and yes, as the judge said at the time, I needed something, a base underneath it to bring the design together. Even having the book at the back of the design, the open book at the back of the design, wouldn't bring the design together enough, because still that black, it becomes part of the design. So I think my idea from earlier of having the enlarged certificates or a grouping of certificates underneath it would help bring the design together and add to the interpretation, the memories part of the design title, and allow me to integrate every part of the design into that one design. That's our design for this week. If you'd like your own design analysed, just go to the website and follow the instructions there. We do put these videos out every week, and they are always of my own designs, and looking at how I could improve those designs, because I need that education. I need that infusion of knowledge that comes from an independent analysis of my design. I know what the judges said at the time. I know what I felt at the time. Time has passed. My design skills have developed since that time, I would hope. And what this gives me is an added bit of education, and we always need to learn. So there's the opportunity for you to learn and to revisit some of your designs, or to practice a design and send it in and get some ideas of how you could improve it before you submit it or put it in for a competition. I will leave you with all of those things to think about. I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Review.